Rosh Hashanah. Today is the day of the Jewish New Year, and it is also the day of the Feast of Trumpets in the biblical fall feasts. Today is a 2-day feast because you don't know the day or the hour that the actual day starts, because you got to wait for the moon to show itself of the turning of the new moon. The Day of Trumpets, or the Feast of Trumpets, this is a trumpet. When you think of a biblical trumpet, this is what you're thinking of. It's called a shofar. This is what would be blown. And I'm not going to try to do that, because when I try to do it, it makes really bad noises. Sounds pretty cool when you can do it right, but I'm not good at it, so I'm not going to mess with it. All right, we are talking about the end times, and we are going to start looking at what Jesus had to say about this, and it ties back to Daniel, where we were in the last message. So let's start with the book of Luke, chapter 21. Jesus starts to speak of the end times, and I think this is so relevant today, especially today on the Feast of Trumpets, but also because of what's going on in Israel. Just yesterday, they were attacked by Iran. They've been at war on every side, and that's been going on since beginning last year. And I believe a lot of this war going on with Israel is going to come to a conclusion that will start fulfilling some prophecies. But we're not there yet. We're not going to talk about that. Let's get the framework here. Jesus is going to tell us what to expect at the end. And I know we like to look at stuff going on in the world, an event here, a war there, and try to say, oh, is that the sign? Is that the sign? Is that what we're looking for? Jesus says no. Let's look at what he says. And while some were speaking of the temple and how it was adorned with noble stones and offerings, he said, for all these things you see, the days will come when there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. And they asked him, Teacher, when will these things be? Disciples asked the first question, when will these things be? And what will be the sign when these things are about to take place? Always looking for signs. So he asked for when? Give us a date and tell us what's the sign. Matthew says it this way, Matthew 24. They asked this question. The disciples came privately, saying, Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? So that last question is wrapped up with, what is the sign of your coming and the end of the age? And isn't that really what we're looking at here? When's the end of the age? When is Christ going to return and set up his glorious kingdom? And the disciples were looking for that too. And they were asking, Jesus, we don't get it. If you're talking about the destruction of the temple and all the Jewish leaders and the leaders of our people are rejecting you, how in the world are you going to show yourself as Messiah? And how is that going to happen? When's this going to happen? What's the sign to show us this is about to happen? So that's what they're asking. And Jesus answers their question. He answers it very, very explicitly. But the first thing he tells them is to be careful. Do not be deceived. In Luke chapter 21, he says, See that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, I am he. The time is at hand. Do not go after them. So the first thing we got to understand here is he's telling the disciples, don't be led astray by anybody who says that they are me or that they are in my place. They are taking my prerogative, my authority. Nobody but me. And he tells them later on what the sign of his coming, and it'll be no mistake. There will be no way to question whether or not Jesus has come back or not. Everybody will see it. Everybody will know. So first, don't be deceived. Now, at that time, there had been many who rose up and called themselves the Christ or the Messiah, and the Romans put them down quickly. Many wars and famines and pestilences and earthquakes happened between this being written or when Jesus said this, and the temple being destroyed in 70 AD. So when Jesus speaks about all these things in Luke chapter 21 and Matthew chapter 24, and he talks about all the stuff that we're looking for, nation rising against nation, kingdom against kingdom, earthquakes, famines, pestilence, and persecution. He talks about that. And then you'll see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, and know that the desolation has come near. I'm in Luke 21. And then he says, if you're in Judea, get out of town. Things are going to get really bad. For these are the days of vengeance that may fulfill all that is written. And so he talks about that, and it came true. Matthew says in chapter 24, verse 34, truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. So Jesus is claiming that his words are a prophecy and they will come true, like he said, and not a word will fail. And it truly happened. Jerusalem was destroyed. One stone was taken down by another until there was no stone left on top of another. The Romans did this to get all the melted gold out between the rocks of the destruction of the temple, and they literally fulfilled Jesus' words. And that generation saw it. It happened within 40 years of Jesus' lifetime. And they saw it. All of these things happened. There was a great earthquake in Jerusalem on the day Jesus died. And I think I mentioned that in one of the other videos. It rent the rocks, and there was signs in the sky, and there was pestilences, and there was great persecution, and they I heard that back in 70 AD when they destroyed the temple, they killed so many Jews and crucified so many Jews that they cut down all the forests in the area and ran out of wood. That's how many people they killed. So it was bad. And Jesus, what he said, came true. Now, as we talked about double fulfillments, is this all that happened? Is this it? This doesn't apply to us anymore. We don't have to worry about this anymore because this already happened almost 2,000 years ago. So Jesus says in Matthew 24, verse 15, so when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, then let those who are in Judea flee to Jerusalem, or flee to the mountains. And then verse 21, for then there shall be great tribulation, such as has never been since the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. And if those days had not been cut short, no human would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. So what's he saying here? Was this going to happen in 70 AD, the worst time that the world has ever seen? That has ever happened and ever will happen? No, that can't be. The language is so strong here that you can't conclude that everything Jesus spoke about was fulfilled at the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. It was fulfilled, his word was fulfilled, but there's more to it. This is where we get this double fulfillment. Something like what happens here is going to happen again. In fact, he tells us specifically what will happen. He says in verse 15, the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel. And when you see that, the people of his time listening to him would have said, well, wait a minute, what do you mean when we see this? This happened 160 some years ago. What are you talking about? In Daniel chapter 9 and Daniel chapter 11, Daniel speaks like 400 and some years before Christ, 100 and 200 years before the Greeks took over, and a man named Antiochus Epiphanes, who was a warrior who ruled over the Judean area for about 6 years, he committed what was then known as the abomination of desolation. He went into the temple, raised a statue of Zeus, killed a pig on the altar, saturated the Holy of Holies with pig's broth and blood, and desecrated the temple. Something that was just wicked. And that's what everybody thought was the abomination of desolation. But Jesus is saying, when you see it happen, and they're like, wait a minute, it already happened. What's that about? Again, see, there was a fulfillment, but then there's going to be a second fulfillment, another fulfillment. In fact, I think there's more than one abomination of desolation. Go back to Daniel chapter 9, and this has always been in front of my face, and I've never noticed it until recently. After he tells about the 69 weeks when the Messiah is cut off and shall have nothing, then the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and sanctuary. This is 70 AD, the destruction of the temple. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. And then desolations are decreed. That little word right there, those little words, desolations, plural, are decreed. God has decreed that there will be more than one desolation or an abomination that makes things desolate there on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And I want to submit that the first one happened in 164 BC under Antiochus Epiphanes, where he did that first abomination. Then another one would happen in 70 AD when the Romans destroyed the temple and took down every single stone. And then another one would happen in 637 AD when the Muslims took over Jerusalem and built the Dome of the Rock that you now see standing in Jerusalem as a testament to an abomination of desolations on the Temple Mount there today. But that's not the final one. There's another one coming, and that's the one that Jesus is speaking of here. He's not speaking of the one by the Muslims, because Daniel tells us very clearly that the man who is going to commit this abomination is going to do something that nobody has ever done before, that has never happened in history under any of these other circumstances. In Daniel 11, he says in verse 36, "And the king shall do as he wills. He'll exalt himself and magnify himself above every god and speak against the God of gods. And he shall prosper until the indignation is accomplished and the decree shall be done. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers or to the one beloved by women. He shall not pay attention to any other god. He shall magnify himself above all, and he shall honor the God of fortresses instead of these, the God whom his fathers did not know. He shall honor with gold and silver and precious stones and costly gifts." Now, that has not happened. There has not been a man who has stood on the holy place there and worshiped an unknown God that nobody's known before and exalted himself as God. Antiochus Epiphanes did do this in a sense, because he named himself Epiphanes, which is like to say that he is the presence of God. And the Jews made fun of him and called him Antiochus Epimanes, which means the madman. But what Jesus is speaking of here in Daniel is something that a time will come that is worse than anything that's ever come upon the earth. So as bad as 70 AD was, and as bad as Antiochus Epiphanes was, there's something worse coming. And you can't reinterpret that to mean something else. Jesus means what he says, and that is, he says, when you see this. Now, here's the problem. If you're a dispensational, pre-tribulational, premillennialist, you read that and say, oh, I don't have to worry about that. I'm not going to see that. I'm going to be raptured out of here, and I don't have to worry about any of that. Too bad for those poor tribulation saints who are going to have to deal with that. I want to challenge that in another video. But are you sure? Are you sure? Because here's what I want to end with today. I don't want to get go too much further here. But Jesus tells his disciples that at the end, there would be all the things we're seeing right now, that we've been seeing throughout the ages, but they seem to be getting worse. These are the things that will happen. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, great earthquakes, famines, pestilence, terrors, and great signs from heaven. In fact, that word terrors in verse 11, chapter 21, is a word that comes from the word phobia, like when you have a phobia, you're scared of something. But the word is phobotron. That's what the word terrors means. I don't think it's used really anywhere else. But in Greek literature, that word phobotron is only used for words like monsters, terrible creatures. Okay, so Jesus is even saying there will be terrors, monstrous creatures, and great signs from heaven. And before all this, they will lay hands on you and persecute you and deliver you up to the synagogues and prisons and before kings for my name's sake. And he says in Matthew the same thing. They will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because lawlessness will increase, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations. Then the end will come. Right now, I'm seeing all these videos on YouTube about the end of the world, the rapture is coming right now, because some missiles got thrown at Israel. Jesus says, many will come and say, I am he, or now is the time. Don't follow after them. Don't be fooled. Don't be deceived. He says all these things are going to happen first before the end will come. And one of them, which we don't like, especially in America, we really don't think this is going to happen to us. But you will be hated by all nations for my sake. And many will fall away. Many will betray one another and hate one another. So before we finish here, let me just ask you this. Are you ready to be hated for the name of Jesus? Are you ready for that? I don't know if I'm ready for that. I hope so. I pray. I don't want to be one of the many who fall away. But he's saying this, many will fall away. Many have already fallen away. Many of Christians and Christian leaders have already fallen away. But more will be done. Family members will turn on each other. And when that begins to happen, and you're depending on the rapture to rescue you so you don't have to worry about it, and you can just go ahead and watch football and not have to worry about any of this stuff happening to you because you have a dispensational theology. Are you going to be ready for this kind of persecution? Because only those who love the truth, only those who love Jesus, who is the truth, who love Jesus more than their own life, will endure to the end and thus be saved out of the terrible things that are coming. Are you ready for that? There's more. We'll get to it in the next video, and we'll look at the things that are coming ahead. But this is what's coming. We're already in bad times, and guess what? Bad times are going to get worse before the end. And we need to settle in our hearts, or prepare our hearts to love Jesus more than anything, even more than our own life. And if you think, oh, well, yeah, I'll be okay, I'll get through that. If you're not even loving Christ now, you're not even in fellowship with his people now, you're not even living for him right now, how are you going to stand up under this kind of persecution that is to come before the end? I'm saying this to myself because I've heard people preach so strong and then fall away. I don't want to be one of them. I hope and pray neither will you. Shalom. See you on the next one.